Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second webinar in our digital learning skills journey. I see we've got Sandile with us, and Precious, and a Mr. or Mrs. Ashmita. Oh, it's left again. Good afternoon. Did I just see you, Sandile?
Yes, I'm trying to switch off my camera.
Okay. Oh, I can switch it off for you. That's no
Okay.
problem. It's switched off now, so that's
Alright.
fine. So
Okay,
that's
thanks.
fine. Wonderful. Welcome on this Wednesday afternoon in this bit of crazy times with long weekends and lots of load shedding. I'm very happy that you chose to join us. Can I just ask, out of curiosity's sake, did you also attend last week's webinar?
Yes, I attended, but I attended very late.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. And for the other participants, could you maybe please put in the chat whether you attended last week's webinar? Okay, you are able to switch on your microphone if you want to and share that with us. If not, then I just want to start. Oh, so there's a question for you, Sandilev, of whether you received the recording from last week's webinar in the email. Okay. Quick introduction. My name is Josina Over the Vest. I'm with Flying Cows of Josie, and we host these webinars on behalf of Oxford University Press. With me as facilitators in this webinar are some of the digital skills coaches from Flying Cows of Josie, and those are Tokozile Mokwena, Nozuko Gumede, Koketso Moropane, and Tombi Kayise Shlongo. So can I quickly ask you, Tokozile, Nozuko, Koketso, and Tombi? I see that Tombi has just fallen away. If you can quickly switch on your camera so people can see you. That's Tokozile. And that's Koketso. Thank you so much. So they'll be on site assisting me, and they will also be looking at the chats. So if I don't respond to the chats, they will be there to alert me to it. So without much further ado, let me start the presentation for you now. And then we delve right in there. Okay. Okay, so this is webinar 2 in our series of digital learning skills. And this one is called Tips and Tricks for Digital Learning, especially in the blended environment. And with blended, we mean the mix between traditional classroom teaching and online teaching. And we'll also show you how Oxford EduZone facilitates digital blended learning. So this is a bit of the overview that we've got in the webinar today, but let's start here first. So we kindly ask you to complete the workshop attendance register. So you can either type the URL in your browser, or you can click on the link that you'll find on top of the chat. That's probably easiest. You can also scan the QR code that you can see on the right. And I would like to tell you that all participants that complete both the workshop attendance register, so that what we're asking you to do now, as well as the workshop feedback form, which we'll share the link to at the end, will receive a certificate of attendance via email. So it's well worth your while. So in the webinar today, we'll first look at the training objectives. We'll do a short icebreaker and have a look at a video about Oxford EduZone. From there, we'll move into opportunities of blended learning, or what it actually is. From there, we'll move into a theory block where we'll discuss concepts like transactional distance and synchronous and asynchronous learning activities. We'll do an activity where we'll be comparing the past with the present. And then we'll do another theory block on cognitive load, a short activity, and we'll watch a video on managing cognitive load and overload. And then we'll close off. The objectives for today. By the end of the workshop, you will realize the opportunities of blended learning. You understand more about the theory of transactional distance. You will know how to manage transactional distance by balancing synchronous and asynchronous learning activities. You understand the concept of cognitive load. And you'll have some strategies to prevent cognitive overload. You will also realize how Oxford EduZone supports both balancing synchronous and asynchronous activities and preventing cognitive overload. Our workshop guidelines and ground rules are that we'll agree to appreciate and respect each other and commit our full and timely attention to the workshop. This icon represents a webcam, which means we can switch on our camera during interactive activities, and we have the option to switch it off during presentations. And I would recommend you to do that also to preserve your bandwidth. This is the icon for a mic. So please switch on your mic if you want to speak, and switch off your mic while you're listening to also avoid background noise for the other participants. Questions are very welcome because we would like this workshop to be interactive. So you can put them in the chat or you can raise your hand, and the facilitators, Tokozile and Koketso and Tombi, will be on the lookout for people who've got questions and make sure that we attend to them. This is the sign for a mistake. And we always say mistakes are welcome. That's how we learn. And that's almost saying for myself, so don't blame me if I make a mistake, because that's how we all learn. All materials presented will be made available after the session. You can actually already see them under the handouts. We've got the PDF of the slides that we'll be presenting today, plus also a participant's manual. So don't worry too much if it goes fast. There will always be the opportunity to read it again, and you will also receive a recording of the session, so you can even watch it again if you want to. And last one, let's have some fun together, because we're learning, and learning should be fun. Okay, are there any questions so far? No, so if we're good to go, then we'll continue. Tokozile and Koketso, no questions that you pick up?
We don't have questions, but Orapeleng and Ashmita are saying that they've got some network issues, but they will try and hang on till further notice.
Okay, now that's great. Thank you so much for that. We know that the platform takes a bit of bandwidth, so that might be an issue. And of course, we all know about the load shedding that's going on at the moment. Okay, thank you. So can I ask Tokozile or Tombi to have a look at the message from Nozuko in the WhatsApp and share that in the chat, so that maybe Derek can assist her with that in the presenters chat, please. Thank you. Okay, first of all, and this is how we start every webinar. So let's check in together. So we also asked a question last week, but how do you feel? Think back to today, 2 years ago. lockdown was still fairly new, and we thought, no, this is just going to take a couple of weeks and we'll be back in our schools. Little did we know that school lockdowns and rotational schedules were going to be part of our daily reality. And it actually forced many of us to fully embrace digital education. So when you think back to that roller coaster ride of these past 2 years, how do you feel? So I'll kindly ask you to go to the chat, and where you can add a message, you can choose an emoji. And please choose one of the emojis that best represents how you feel over the roller coaster ride of the past 2 years. And I'm going to quickly come join you there. And if you can't find the emoji, we're also happy with you putting in words. Okay. Do we all know how to put in our feedback? Okay, maybe I can just ask. Sandilia, apologies for addressing you by your first name, but that's the name that I can see on my screen here. Oh, but you seem to be quite happy about it. We got Maulila present. Okay, yes, please, Sandila.
No, maybe I need to actually put my credentials on the table. I'm not actually a teacher. I'm working in the Department of Education in Northern Cape. I'm responsible for development. And you'll see my comment there is that that I've put in an emoji, a smiling emoji. And the reason I'm putting a smiling emoji is that I feel that with COVID, although that people passed on and all those things happened, but I think also that in terms of education, it has actually put us a little bit forward in terms of our own doing and thinking, because I think things that we're planning to, we're going to do in years to come, COVID has forced us that we should not be thinking 10 years. We should actually immediately implement those kind of things. I mean, that as we are speaking now is that I'm talking to you, and the last 2 years is that we didn't have this kind of situation. So that's why I said that I saw the advent of COVID as giving us an opportunity to propel us going forward as the Department of Education, and also assisting our educators to also come along with us. Thanks.
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you so much for that contribution. Because I fully agree with you, because we've been working towards digital education for years already. Because I think the first white paper from the DBE on e-learning is from 2004, if I'm correct. And ever since, we've been working hard in trying to achieve something. And suddenly we've been giving this push that we can no longer say it's a nice to have. We now realize it's a need to have, which, like you say, has propelled a lot of developments. So thank you very much for sharing that. So from the other participants, I see that Dr. Rudy seems to have difficulties participating. And Olila, I don't know if you want to contribute. Great, thank you. So wonderful. So you had a good experience with online and digital education. And I think you were in the session last week as well, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, great. Let's continue where we are. So thank you for that feedback, and it will actually move us right into the next activity. So considering the number of participants this afternoon, I think we won't be using the breakaway rooms. But let's take a few minutes to reflect on working with technology in the classroom, and then think about ourselves, what was our biggest success when using technology in teaching? But we're also interested to learn in what was the biggest failure when using technology in teaching. And these are examples where we can learn from each other. So I would actually also like to invite our facilitators on the group to maybe contribute the stories that they can share about teaching with technology. And maybe Mr. So Sandila, you probably have heard a lot of stories from educators or from schools. So you might also have some success stories and failures to share. We really look forward to hearing from those. Thokozile, maybe you want to start with an example of a success and a failure. And let's see if other people recognize that.
Okay, good afternoon. So my biggest success when using technology in teaching was last year during the COVID times, where I actually started having a fully online class, and the learners were participating. And upon them coming back to school, I realized that what we had done online, most of the kids had actually grasped on it, and they were able to ask me questions that were related to the content, and they understood so many of the things that we did. So that was great.
No, wonderful. And do you also have a failure that you want to share?
So a failure is, so I'm currently teaching technology, right? And the content that we teach is fully online. And we've had a few days where we had no Wi-Fi in the school. And that had a huge impact on my lessons. Yes. It had a huge impact on my lessons because I couldn't teach, because everything that we do is fully online. So that was my failure, basically.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So any of the participants, do you have any stories to share about a success when teaching with technology? Or maybe a failure?
On the success part, is that number one is that I'm in the Northern Cape, and being in the Northern Cape is that for us as officials, I think technology has actually brought the distances nearer. That means that we didn't have to actually travel very long distances. Is that we were just in the office and able to connect with one another and speak to one another. But I also think that in terms of the school teachers, for them it was nice to have the online classes. However, the unfortunate thing is that not a lot of our children are exposed to having the facilities, number one, of this thing. And also that even if they have the facility, then you have a problem of the data. But also, once you have the data there, is that we are in the Northern Cape, and I think that a number of our cellular companies do not want to invest in spectrum within the Northern Cape. So some of the children is that although that we can say that we can make this available, but there are those areas where this technology is not accessible, it's not available. So those are some of the challenges that we are actually having. Hence, for us, the issue of technology is that it can be good, but at the same time, you cannot actually rely too much on it because a vast number of our people will be left out.
Yes. No, and I fully agree with you there, because I think so even with our company, we're looking at working towards bridging the digital divide in basic education. But what I think COVID has done, it's actually widened the divide. It's become very clear that schools who were able to do so and who were prepared and who are in areas where there is a lot of connectivity and where parents are able to pay for data, they were able to just switch on and continue learning and teaching, whereas a vast majority of our schools and learners are suffering from bad connectivity and high data costs, despite all the free content that became available. Because let's not forget about that. I think that was really great. But one of the problems with that is, the more content you make available, the more difficult it becomes from teachers to find their way in that content. I always liken it a bit to that huge library that you say, look, here's the library, you can go in. You just have to find your own way. And I think that can also be overwhelming for teachers and learners alike. So yes, COVID has shown us quite a few things. And I think it's quite shocking that after all these years, connectivity still seems to be an issue and those data costs are just too high. Yes.
Can I just add something also again? Sorry.
Yes, no, please do.
Yeah, it's just to say that, one of the advantages of the COVID is that we from our side now, in terms of the disadvantaged children, we are having a premier who's supporting the idea of saying that, we need to identify certain schools where the schools will be given the tablets. And then we are also talking to a service provider that is talking about a pocket school. Now, with the pocket school, it means that you load all the content, the children are able to actually on their own be able to actually look at the lessons. And I'm saying that when you look at those kind of things, those are things that we never actually thought are going to happen at this point. We thought about the future, but because of COVID, it has actually propelled us to move us very fast to say that we are here today. And I mean that, we have an issue called pocket school. Now, with this pocket school, we also are going to talk to the issue of broadcasting lessons straight into the classroom. And I think it will actually assist with when we have children, the teachers not being in the class. Whilst we have an assistant in the classroom who's able to keep order, the children are able to participate in the lesson. And at the same time, also that they're able to interact with the person presenting the lesson. So those are some of the advantages, yes.
Yeah, no, wonderful. But what we should never forget is, that still the main mediator between the lesson content and the learners are the teachers. So we must also make sure that we educate, the teacher professional development is really important. And I think you also, if you've watched and read the documentation from last week's webinar, that we really looked at the professional development framework for digital learning that the DBE has published, because we really need to assist our teachers with that. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, any feedback from Lila? Would you have anything to contribute on your experiences with teaching with technology? Or Tombi Footy, I'm sorry if I'm not sure. I think that's your first name. I'm sorry to be calling you by your first name, but that's the only thing that comes up on my screen here. Would you be willing to share something? Okay. If not, then we'll move on and delve straight into a quote first, because I think this is important. It's a quote from Benjamin Franklin, who says, "Tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn." And I think that's very important, both for teachers and for learners. Okay, so before we go further in the content, we're going to play this short video that will showcase Oxford EduZone to you. So let me stop sharing, and Tokozile, can you please start the Oxford EduZone video?
Succeed with 360-degree teaching. Oxford EduZone is a digital platform providing learners, teachers, students, and lecturers with an easy way to keep ahead and succeed.
Once you have subscribed, log in by entering your username and password. The e-reader enables you to access both online and offline educational content. Once you have downloaded the content, it can be viewed in offline mode at any time. The e-reader supports mobile apps for iOS and Android. All the apps support offline reading. Teachers can assign homework to their classes or individual learners. By clicking on the homework button, Learners can see which homework or assessments have been assigned to them and when they are due. They can also see which assignments have already been submitted and the marks they earned for their assignments. Learners receive regular notifications to remind them of what needs to be done and by when. Educational content is organized into a library to provide comprehensive remote learning experiences. Enhanced ebooks are easy to use and navigate. The contents page shows the contents at a glance and makes it easy to find the pages you want to visit. Jumping to different pages within the ebook is as easy as selecting and clicking or tapping. Adding bookmarks is easy. Simply click or tap on these flags to create your personal bookmarks. Here you can see all your bookmarks, when you have created them, and on which pages they are. Learners can view audio, video, slideshows, animations, simulations, links, assessments, and much more as clickable hotspots on the pages of the enhanced ebooks. This icon, for example, opens up a slideshow with additional photographs and information. Videos can be accessed from resources or by clicking or tapping this button on the page. Videos can also be expanded and viewed in full screen mode by clicking or tapping the expand button. To add a note, select some text and click or tap on the pen tool at the top right corner. When you're done, your note can easily be removed. Select the highlighter to highlight your text.
EduZone gives your learners the freedom to navigate backwards and forwards through the course themselves and become confident 21st century learners. Join the future of teaching. Contact Oxford University Press today or simply Google Oxford EduZone for more info.
Okay, thank you for that. If there are any questions on Oxford EduZone, please let us know. And I'm sorry to see from the chat, there are a few participants in the webinar who have a bit difficulty with network, and that it's difficult to hear us and to hearing the questions. In one of our testing sessions that we always do, we've learned that it helps if you push up the volume on your side. That might have an impact. Yeah, and otherwise, I hope that the network that you have changes. I don't know if you're currently suffering from load shedding or not. Okay, let's move on. I'm going back to my to the presentation. Unless there are any questions, then please share them with me. And we'll just continue here. Okay. Was the video. Let's move on quickly. Okay. So let's talk about blended learning and what it actually is. So blended learning, or hybrid learning as people also call it, combines online educational materials and opportunities for interaction online with more traditional place-based classroom methods. So I think a lot of the schools will now have moved to this mode of learning, where previously we actually just had classroom learning. During COVID, we moved to full online learning. And now we're navigating our way between the two a bit, because learners are back in the classroom, but we still have the digital available. So how do we manage the two? And what are the opportunities that it offers us? So when you look at blended learning, we talk about the convenience and flexibility that it offers us. It has the opportunity to enhance learning because it offers increased depth of understanding of content and retention of course content. It also helps with more meaningful discussions, and it puts an emphasis on writing, digital skills, and life skills like time management, independence, and self-discipline. Now, if we go back to last week's webinar, we spoke about the increasingly transformative pedagogical strategies that we would employ, which would be focused on more learner-centered strategies. And part of that is self-regulation by the learners. So time management, independence, and self-discipline are all part of that. So Thokozile, you had an example to share with us on this, on how it enhances learning.
Yes, everyone, please just stay tuned into the video.
No, it's not a video. The example that you shared this morning on how digital learning had your learners ask more relevant questions.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so with the blended learning, we've realized that learners normally in class, they will just ask you questions even when there's no need for that. Simply because you're there, they'll be asking you questions that sometimes are not even related to the topic that you're doing. And once you get onto online learning, that's where now the learners are able to think about problem solving on their own. And whenever they engage with you, it opens up more space, and they engage in a way that is more related to the content that you're doing, rather than them asking, should I write this in 2 lines or 1 line? Should I make this a 1-word answer? But they'll figure that on their own, and it makes the learners more independent in terms of their learning. So it goes around that.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. And I don't know if other people recognize this as well. Okay. And it also levels the playing field for all types of learners. So we find it also goes back to what Thokozile was just saying. Learners can take more time and reflect before communicating, but also shy students who might not be comfortable to ask questions in the actual classroom, they maybe are less shy when they have to ask their questions in an online way. It increases potentially teacher-learner and learner-learner interaction. And it enables innovative teaching with learner-centered approaches. That's what I just said, those transformative pedagogies that we spoke about last week. And the last one, and I think this should also speak to teachers, because it improves administration, because it records online interactions, and learners leave a digital footprint when they have to submit their homework, for example. And it helps you to manage not just your grades online, but there's a lot of digital platforms available that can do the marking for you on the assessments you set. There's also that functionality in the Oxford EduZone platform. So are there any questions around these opportunities? So please let me know, Thokozile or Tombi, if you see any questions coming up in the chat. Otherwise, we're moving on to the next part. But in addition to opportunities, there are things, let us not call them problems or challenges, but things that we need to take into account. Because the more we deal with our learners at a distance, so with online learning, for example, the more distance starts to appear between the learner and the teacher and between the learners amongst themselves. So there's a gentleman called Mr. Moore who created the transactional distance theory, and he more did that around distance learning, because let's not forget that online learning is actually a form of distance learning like we used to have. And I think that the best example that we can use for that in the South African context is UNISA, which always was a distance learning establishment, where before you would get your content delivered by mail and you would hardly have any interaction with your teachers or your fellow learners. And these days, obviously, it's more online. But what it says here is that if we look here on the y-axis, that looks at the structure of the content that we often offer. So the more structured a course or a lesson is, the more there's a capacity for learners to work on it individually. So they need less interaction. So the more we have a transactional distance, as it's called, because learners, like you used to do at UNISA, would complete the lessons by themselves and then just send them back to the lecturer. On the y-axis, we're looking at dialogue, which is what's happening in the contact between teachers and learners amongst themselves. So the more dialogue there is, the less transactional distance there is. And the less dialogue, the more transactional distance. So, but obviously, especially in a high school environment, the transactional distance is not a positive thing, because we want our learners to feel part of the class. We want them to not feel isolated, and we want them to be motivated. So we need to look, what is the optimal position here on this diagram to say, how can we deal with that? So the opportunities, obviously, from blended learning are that with more structure and less dialogue, that is possible for them, especially if we look at more learner-centered, but that also means that we've got an increased transactional distance. So, for example, for a better understanding where the least transactional distance sits would be in a physical education class. Because the content you offered is not really that structured. You know, you'll be doing various exercises or playing games with them, and they don't really do that individually. And there's a lot of teacher-learner and learner-learner interaction, or dialogue, as we say it. So I hope that those examples make sense, where we say a UNISA student would sit here on the transactional distance overview, and a physical education class, you would sit much more here. Now, if we look at blended grade 8 to 12 classrooms, we need to manage the structure and the dialogue, and look at choosing pedagogical strategies that encourages learner-centered learning, so that we need to offer them structure, and increases independent learner, which also has to do with the structure. But it also needs to reduce uncertainty and raise motivation and combats isolation. So I think if we sit somewhere more here, so where there still is plenty of dialogue with the teacher and with other learners, but with more structured lessons, then we would end up somewhere here. So does it make sense? Are there any questions on this theory of transactional distance? Now you might ask, no questions. Okay, thank you for letting me know. So if we say we need to manage structure and dialogue, you can say, yeah, Josina, that's a great statement. But how do we actually do that? And I think you already saw it in the training objectives, where you spoke about balancing synchronous with asynchronous activities. So let us first move to synchronous learning activities. So that's actually the dialogue side of the diagram. So what does it mean, synchronous learning activities? Those are actually the activities that are live, real time, usually scheduled, and it often includes facilitated instruction. So very simple, what you can think about asynchronous activities is having a lesson in a classroom, because the learners know they have to be at 8 o'clock, their first lesson, mathematics starts, the teacher's there, the learners are there. So that's a synchronous learning activity. But you can also have that online, the synchronous learning activity. So what we're having now in this webinar is actually a synchronous learning activity. The interaction is learning oriented. So just in short, it's all those moments when we engage with our learners as a group or even individually, and where learners can work and learn together. It can be both online and it can be in the classroom. So these are some examples of synchronous learning activities. So this is also giving feedback to our learners. It is collaboration between learners amongst themselves. We're having real-time conversation. It might be a one-on-one between a teacher and a learner, where you could say after class, we will have a coaching session or a tutoring session. You can also have your instruction for the full class, or you can break it up into smaller groups. So this is more about community and relationships. So these are what we call synchronous activities. So, and that means synchronous between the teacher and the learner, or in a synchronous environment, and between learners amongst themselves. Is it clear what those synchronous activities are?
Can you explain again?
So synchronous activities are the real-time activities. So the example, maybe the simplest example is of a synchronous activity is a lesson in a classroom where there are teachers, there are learners, and the teacher is teaching a lesson. That's a synchronous learning activity. But it can also be, if you've broken up your class into groups and you've asked learners in groups to work on assignments, when the learners work on that assignment in the classroom, then it's also a synchronous activity. Or they might be doing it in an online session. But they're meeting together, they're talking about it. So I think meeting and being together, those are important components of it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And maybe it also becomes clear as in when we look at what asynchronous activities are. So that's opposed to synchronous. We've got asynchronous activities, and those look more at the structure. So that is where all those educational activities and discussions and assignments that engage learners in learning at their own pace in their own time. So they don't have to pitch up for class. They don't have to attend a webinar at a certain time. They just get the assignment to say, you need to watch this recorded lesson, or you need to listen to this podcast, or your assignment is to research and explore, or do some practice work, or read more and take notes. So those are all activities that a learner does by him or herself. Does that make sense? So for example, maybe a good example is right now, me and the facilitators and the participants to this webinar, we are engaged in a synchronous learning activity because we came here on time, we've agreed on a time, we are all here, it's live, it's real time, and learning is taking place between us. Now this webinar is being recorded and it will be sent out to all the participants. And you might decide to watch the video again or to show it to a colleague. If now this colleague is going to watch the recording of the webinar, then it's no longer a synchronous learning activity because it's not live, but then it's an asynchronous activity because the person watching the recording of the video decides on the time and the place where they are going to get this learning content for themselves. Does that make sense? Does it clarify, or does that make it more complicated?
It does clarify things.
Okay, wonderful. So are there any other questions about synchronous and asynchronous activities? There are no questions. Then we move to an example. So we already spoke a bit, so that's what I like, this image. We spoke a bit about Oxford EduZone, and Oxford EduZone actually really facilitates blended learning, because you can the synchronous activities that you do can come together with the asynchronous activities that you could do. And I think we've got an example, and it would be best, I think, if Thokozile starts the video, because she can then explain it best. Let me stop sharing here and move over to here.
Welcome
so if
to
you
Oxford
could please start the
EduZone. Today we are looking at EMS in grade 8. In your dashboard, you will find learning content, and under learning content, you will find your library. In your library, you will find textbooks ranging from grade 8 to grade 10, and you will see that it's all different textbooks. From here, you're going to select Economic and Management Science in grade 8. Oxford EduZone gives you teacher's guides and learner's book to work with. Today, we're looking at Unit 1, that is Government. You will ask the learners to read up on Unit 1 and to read for understanding. Then you will set up a quiz to check if the learners understand the content and have processed the information. To set up the quiz on EduZone, you will go into Assessments and you will use the options for questions. You can then group your learners and ask each group to prepare a multimedia on different tiers of government. Each group will be given a different tier, and they can submit their multimedia in the Google Class. As the teacher, you will then follow the preparations and be available for guidance to all the groups whenever they need it. The groups will then present their multimedia in class, and the lesson will be recorded. Presentations and lessons will be uploaded on EduZone so that the learners and the teacher may be able to access them whenever there's a need. Then, as the teacher, you can set up a test to check if the lesson objectives, which were set at the beginning of the lesson, have been met. I hope this helps you out, and thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Thokozile. So are there any questions on that from any of the participants?
Sorry, can I just find out how does one get access to the Oxford EduZone?
Okay, so maybe that's a good question to pass on to the Oxford University Press representative. So we'll ask them that and come back to you on that before the end of the workshop, because I think it would be useful also for the Northern Cape department to understand. So I believe they offer trial access to people who want that. So we'll share that with Derek. Could someone in the presenters chat please put in a message to that effect? Thank you. So we'll come back to you on that, if that's okay. Okay, so I'm continuing with my presentation. Please Please let me know if you can see it. So this is just in words the example that Tokozile just described. So on the library, you can choose the textbook, set a quiz. So these are different activities. So if you look at it, you know, for students to read the unit, they can either read that while in class or they can read that in their own time. So that's both synchronous or asynchronous. So you set it up in Oxford EduZone. You say, this is the textbook, this is what you have to read. Setting the quiz and having the learners take the quiz, that's also an asynchronous activities. Then grouping the learners and asking them to prepare a multimedia presentation and having them work on that multimedia presentation in class would be a synchronous activity. And as a teacher, you follow the proper preparations in the group and you're available for guidance. So if you have them work on this project in the classroom, then that would also be a synchronous activity. But if you have them do it online and they do it in their own time and you just check in, for example, via Google Classroom where they are in their group work, then it would be an asynchronous activity. So the groups then present in class and the lesson is recorded. So the presentation in class is a synchronous activity, and then the lessons are recorded and uploaded to EduZone or to somewhere else where at a later stage the learners can still review their own work and the work from other groups. And then as a teacher, you can set an assessment to test if the learning objectives have been met. Okay. So let's have a bit of reflection. Again, we won't go into the breakaway groups, but we just ask you to reflect on some of the following questions. And then we'll see if we can keep track on those suggestions that you make. So when we consider transactional distance and the synchronous and asynchronous activities we just spoke about, where do you see the main similarities between traditional classroom teaching and blended learning? And where do you see the main differences between traditional classroom teaching and blended learning? So does anyone have any input on that? And somebody speak a bit to the similarities between traditional classroom teaching and blended learning? Maybe one of the facilitators can present us with an example.
So whilst they are thinking, is just my own thoughts when I look at it. I think that on the similarities is that both yes involve learners being in the classroom, but also I think that for the traditional classroom is when you see a teacher standing in front of the learners and then teaching. But then when you come to the blended one is that there's an opportunity where learners can actually learn on their own and not actually having the teacher in front of them. But then whilst these two are actually happening at different times, you can always bring them together again when you're actually going to have you as a teacher coming in front of the learners and talking to them about maybe something which they've done virtually, so that the children must be able to see that there is not a similarity, but there is a continuation.
Yes.
It's not that it's two separate things that are operating, but you can see that these two things are actually interlinked with one another.
Yes. And I think that's very important, hey? that we keep on giving learners feedback so that they also know that what they do in their own time, it is being noted by the teacher. So they do it for a purpose. Yeah. Who else has some input on this? So maybe Koketso or Tokozila, you can come up with a similarity or a difference between the two?
So if I can say something with the traditional method, it's actually time consuming because this lesson that we just discussed can take weeks to complete. Whilst with the blended learning, it's easier for us because as the teacher, you don't have to give the learners notes to actually write. Because in a traditional setting, you would either have to make copies or you'd have to give the learners notes. But with this one, you can actually give them the notes online where they will always have them, and that saves us a lot of time in terms of teaching. So using blended learning actually saves more time, and it gives you time to actually focus on more content rather than stretching everything out.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So anybody else who has some ideas on similarities or differences between the two? And Tombi, would you have something to add? Oh, I see that Tombi has fallen out. I think she was suffering from load shedding. Okay, thank you. So any of the attendants? Maybe Maulile or Durrell? Also, if something is not clear, if it's not clear for you what actually the differences could be, then just ask and then we can go over it again. But maybe if we move into the tips and tricks, things will also become clearer. Quickly in between, I see questions from Maulile asking about the presentation. You can find that under the handouts. You can find the participants manual and the presentation. And on top of the chat and the handouts, you will find the link to the attendance register. So I hope that answers your question. So from here, let's move on to the tips and tricks that can help us to manage between the different environments and to make sure that we keep connecting with our learners while they are learning. Okay. So the first category of tips and tricks, as we call them, we talk about let's work together. So the first one is let's create a communicative learning culture with social media groups and online discussions. For example, you can set up a Facebook group with your learners where they can exchange ideas and post relevant links, images, and videos. And we know we can make those groups on Facebook closed groups, because I think that's important to protect our learners a bit. We can set group assignments. So, for example, also on Oxford EduZone will allow you to set up groups, and you can give specific assignments to those groups. So groups within your classroom. You can put learners in charge of part of the lesson. So for many teachers, this can be a new concept. But sometimes it helps, and it also relieves the teacher a bit, but it also aids teachers to learn better, because being part of presenting part of the lesson means that they need to actually prepare for the lesson, and maybe they also feel a bit more motivated. So, for example, an assignment that you could set where you talk about setting group assignments is where teacher groups learners in groups of maybe 5 learners and ask them to discuss the topic of pollution. So that's a life sciences topic. And each group is then given a specific type of pollution to break apart and find information on. So, and then groups are invited by the teacher to chat rooms in an online application like Chatzy, for example, or you could even do that in the classroom environment. The teacher overlooks all the works that the learners do in class. And at the end of the lesson, the learners can compile final report on their findings and submit them in their groups, for example, in the Google Classroom environment. And by having had them prepare that part of the lesson, you can then ask them to also present it to their fellow learners. So they become sort of teachers. And I've heard an example of a teacher who said to me, no, Josina, I would never be able to ask my learners to present part of the lesson. But because I challenged her, she decided to do it. And then she came back and said, you know what, this was the biggest eye-opener ever. Because I always think I'm the one who needs to present the lesson because I know most about it. And this was a physical science teacher. And she'd actually asked her learners to, in groups, prepare some experiments and then report back on that in the classroom. And she said it actually made the learners much more excited about the lessons. They learned more, and I had to prepare less for the lesson. So it was wonderful benefits on all sides. Okay, and what we also spoke about, if you look at giving them more homework to do, where they do it at their own pace, it's always important to set manageable milestones for them, so that there's a lot of interaction with you, that every milestone they reach, there's a feedback moment, so that you don't give them too much work to do so that they get a bit lost and don't know where they are or how to move forward in there. And even the element that we just spoke about is the regular feedback, not just what you would do in a traditional classroom, but also make sure you comment on the work that you've seen them doing outside of the regular classroom work. So are there any questions on the let's work together tips and tricks? So if there's no questions on these, then let's move to the next set of tips, where we talk about have some fun. What we always say that we always want to have in our webinars. So you can provide a lot of interactive activities, and you can do that online, but you can actually also do that in the classroom, especially when it's a classroom where people have devices and you can set them up in various areas. So you can use icebreaker activities, you can give them puzzles, you can let them do presentations, give them peer reviews on the work that they've done. You can offer quizzes. I don't know if you're familiar with a quiz like Kahoot, for example, and then it becomes a sort of a competition element that enters into that. You can run brainstorm sessions and then mind mapping it on a large screen. You can let them play games. There's a very nice game called Nitro Type, for example, where learners will have to type English words, but they can then they will be racing against each other in race cars. But you can also take them on a virtual field trip. You can do that online, but you can also show it in the classroom. So a good example of that is a application called ThinkLink, which allows you to visit, for example, the JSE. Maybe I can imagine learners in the Northern Cape, when would they ever see the inside of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange? So you can decide to take them on a virtual field trip where it feels for them like they visited the JSE. Also, what can be fun is to offer assessment choice, and that's already coming back to the games that you can play, like the Kahoot. But you can also let them do the assessment with their fellow learners, so peer-to-peer participation, have some mentoring encouragement, and to drive creativity. What's also important, and this already talks about the topic we'll be talking about in the 4th webinars, Have your learners explore different media to present their assignments, so video and audio. Because while they do it, we're already sharpening their digital skills. And I think we can all agree that that is what we want our learners to become very comfortable with, because that's something that they need to be able to do going forward in the world. So one of the functionalities on Oxford EduZone is that when you give learners their homework, there is the opportunity, apart from setting assessments, and that also goes back to the assessment choice. So you can have open questions, you can have multiple choice questions, they can have to mix and match their answers, but there's also the opportunity to let them talk their answer into a recording and then share that recording with you so that you can listen to it. So this is exploring different media and using different assessments. So that also keeps it exciting for the learner, but at the same time teaches them a lot of new skills as well. And what's very important is let's allow for mistakes. Not just the learner mistakes that you might want to point out, but also your own mistakes, where you can indicate, well, actually, I thought it worked like this. And we all also know that some learners are much quicker at picking up how certain applications work. And then we can also always ask our learners to assist us to show us how a certain application works and say, you know what, actually, I don't know yet how it works. So please, let's do this together. And from that, we can share our lessons learned. And I think, going forward, and if we look at the 21st century, we often say the people of the future are the people who continue to learn and who are able to unlearn and relearn. So us as teachers also still can learn every day. And the more we show that to our learners, so give them the example for that, the more that they pick up that it's okay to keep on learning and making mistakes. Okay, are there any questions on this? No, we're all still good. Okay, Tokozile, do we see any questions coming in the chat maybe?
We haven't got any questions.
Okay, good. Then we're moving on into the last topic for this afternoon, and that is cognitive overload. And I think it's good that this is the last topic, because otherwise you might be suffering from cognitive overload by now. So if we think about the human mind, we must realize that it can only absorb and retain limited amounts of information. And if we ask ourselves or others to process too much information at once, this can lead to a cognitive overload in the working memory. And I think it's important to realize, your working memory, I think can please switch off the mic. I don't know where the sound is coming from. Can we please? Okay.
Those two definitely you must cover
Okay.
We don't know what's going to happen.
Okay. I've switched off the mics. I hope that's okay. Thank you for that. You see, this is one of the things that can happen. So we don't get upset about that. We just make sure. Oh.
You'll be able to get
so please, can everybody switch off their mics?
This time. And there will be so many seminars and like we call it the foods. Kurumiza umntu omdala. Yabuza phela. Yazwakala.
I don't understand where this sound is coming from because everybody's mics are switched off. Anyway, can everybody still hear me? That's most important.
Yes, we can hear you, Josie.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's move on to the presentation now. So if we look at the working memory, it can only retain up to 5 to 7 items before it needs to start processing from the working memory to the long-term memory. Because if we don't do that, overload can happen, and this will slow down and hinder the learning process. And cognitive overload has a negative impact on the transfer of information from working memory to long-term memory. I think what's also important to mention in this regard is that learning happens better when information that's provided that gets into the working memory and needs to be processed to the long-term memory. If in the long-term memory, it can link to something that we already know. So previous learning or previous fact that we're already comfortable with. So a completely new topic that we don't have any relation to, there's less information of that you can hold. Because when you're processing from working to long-term, there's no already established place where you can place those new facts. So that also makes it more complicated. So what we'll ask you to do now, this is the activity on cognitive overload. So after this slide, we will play you a video which will last about 6 minutes. So it's quite a long video. And in this video, the lady will be talking about cognitive overload, and she will offer you tips how to manage cognitive overload or cognitive load and overload. So what we would like you to do is to watch and listen to this video carefully. And after the video, we will ask you to contribute to the list of tips that we'll be compiling on the whiteboard. So listen to the video and watch the video and write down all the tips that you pick up from the lecturer and what she mentions. So we're going to play the video now. And to make sure that you can really hear it, we'll ask you, we make sure on our side that all the volumes controls are up too loud, but please also up your own volume so you can be sure to watch it out loud. I don't know, Tokozile, in the recording that you've made, do we still see the subtitles under the video?
I'm not sure because I just downloaded it.
Okay. Let's see how that goes. Okay, let me go out of the presentation and come back to you. And then I'll, oh, there you go already. Okay, let me also.
Hello, I'm Agnes Bosenket, Director of Learning and Teaching Staff Development at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. I've been teaching online and in person in higher education for over 20 years. I'd like to start with a story from my own experience as a teacher. I really struggle to remember names. If I could choose a superpower, it would probably be remembering names. A few years ago, I was teaching a face-to-face class of about 150 students, and I vowed I would remember all their names. I used every trick I could find, and it worked. I could remember names. Unfortunately, I couldn't remember anything else. So a student would ask me a question, and I'd say, "That's a great question about an assessment task. I will just have to look up the answer." Or another student would ask about the class schedule, and I'd say, "Hi, Billy, let me just check. I can't remember right now." The price of remembering names was forgetting everything else. The situation I've just described is what educational psychologists refer to as cognitive overload. You might know it as the feeling that your brain is overstimulated and completely full and your thoughts are more or less melting under the pressure. It not only happens to teachers, but it can affect students' capacity to learn as well. While cognitive overload can happen in face-to-face environments, students are at greater risk in an online learning environment because of the added load of managing new technologies and dealing with distractions. It comes down to the brain's finite working memory resources. Humans have a certain working memory capacity, and it's placed under strain when we take on new information or are trying to learn something complex. This capacity is what we call cognitive load, or the amount of mental exertion needed to complete a task. And too much mental exertion leads to the situation I described, cognitive overload. There are 3 types of cognitive load that affect students' ability to learn. First, the intrinsic load associated with the difficulty of a specific subject. Sometimes a concept or task is just hard. Consider using a new piece of software. Perhaps this wouldn't be a heavy lift for you, but for others, the task would require a great deal of concentration. An educator can help manage intrinsic cognitive load through encouragement and support. Extraneous cognitive load is the effort on working memory generated by the way information or tasks are presented to a learner. For instance, how instructions are given or how learning activities are organised. This is the type of cognitive load that can be most easily mitigated by sound online learning design. And finally, germane cognitive load, which refers to the actual processing of new information. How will we organise it in our brains? Does this information connect with anything we've previously learned? Making connections strengthens knowledge and ongoing learning. Now, if cognitive load is a new concept for you, understanding those 3 types might be proving challenging right now. Some practical ideas can help. Here are some simple techniques that you can employ straight away to reduce the cognitive load burden on your online students. Keep it simple, especially when it comes to presenting important course information, such as assessment due dates and live class times. Chunk information. Big blocks of text can quickly overwhelm students. Avoid too much information in learning resources. You might have heard of death by PowerPoint. What I'm doing right now is an example of chunking, using bullet points to space out key bits of information. Use different techniques and media to present information. Variety helps, and some concepts are best presented visually. Scaffold complex content. Like in this video, start with a story, then explain a key concept and provide some practical examples. Allow time for reading, thinking, and discussing. Set aside time for your students to work asynchronously at their own pace. Don't be afraid of silence during class time. You can also use active and engaging learning strategies that get students interacting online, such as polling tools, reaction tools, annotations on the screen, breakout rooms, and collaborating on documents. Get to know your students and recognise their prior knowledge and experience where possible. And finally, encourage breaks. This can be throughout the semester or in a live synchronous online class. Students and teachers alike can find live online classes exhausting. There will still be times in which students and teachers are overwhelmed. Reassure students that this is okay. In my case, trying to remember everyone's name semester after semester proved too difficult. Asking students to display their preferred name made it easy for everyone. One of the advantages of teaching online is having names visible. Perhaps I need to rethink what superpower I will wish for.
Okay, so this was the video. I hope it was clear for everybody to listen to. And now I'm gonna ask you, because I gave you a bit of homework, or not homework, I gave you an assignment before starting the webinar. So what tips and tricks did you pick up from this lecturer? Does anybody have any input? Oh, let me make your mics. Open again. So if you want, please speak up or put something in the chat, and then Tokozile will keep track on our whiteboard.
Sandile here.
Okay, Tokozile, the whiteboard, have you got it up? So Sandile, do you have any feedback? What tips and
Yes.
tricks did you pick up?
A number of them. I think one of the issues is that reassure your students. Encourage breaks, means that don't allow people to go on and on, allow for breaks. And also they say that don't be afraid of silence. When there's quietness, I think people can actually have the time to actually learn, allow time for reading. And then also that very important that you must use different techniques when you deal with it. And also that information should be given in chunks.
Yes.
And don't give too much overload in terms of information. You keep it simple. Don't give too difficult things because in that way is that you are going to lose your students.
Yeah.
So those are some of the tips I picked up.
Yes, no, wonderful. Are you keeping up, Tokozile, with typing them out?
I'm trying to. I'm typing as we speak. Maybe somebody can say that again.
Yeah, so I think most of the tips and tricks that came out, I think you correctly picked up all the tips and tricks that are available in there. Are there people who've got additional tips and tricks that they picked up than the ones that Sandile mentioned? So you can also put them in the chat if you want to. No. So it's fine. I think it was quite clear. So what we can do is, let me share my screen again. Then we have an overview of all of them. Sorry, Tokozile, for pushing out your whiteboard. But I think everything that Sandile mentioned were the ones that were mentioned in the video. So let's talk through them here. Tips and tricks to keep it simple. So one thing what's also relevant, and I don't think that one came out of the video, is you can do an assessment with your learners before the lesson to determine their pre-existing knowledge. So for example, you can create a quiz on Oxford EduZone that you can give learners to do before the lesson. How that will help you is that you know after this quiz what your learners already know and what they're comfortable with and where there are gaps in their knowledge. So in your lesson, you don't then have to repeat everything that is in the lesson, but only focus on those elements where you've picked up that your learners have difficulty with. Chunking content, Sandile also picked up on that one. Put it into smaller parts. And when you work with a PowerPoint like I'm doing now, offer that information in bullet points. Present information visually and verbally. So those are the different techniques. And media. because we all know there are learners with different learning styles. So there are ones who are more, have a visual learning style where they're more comfortable with. Others have a more audio learning style. So we can adapt and adjust and make it relevant to as many learning styles as possible. But what we do need to take care of when we talk about using different techniques, that we limit the number of apps that we use. And we make sure that if we use different apps, they either integrate into your Oxford EduZone or into whatever online lesson platform that you use. So I've got an example of an online teacher who was so excited about being able to teach online and in a digital environment. And he was a geography teacher. And he had all these different apps, because geography, actually, if you go Google them, there's quite a few of educational geography apps. So he thought, now I'm going to use all of them. And then he found out that at the end of the lesson, the learners were just confused by all the different apps and hadn't picked up a single thing about the topic that he tried to teach them. So yes, use different techniques, but make sure that the techniques that you do use actually make sense to the learners. So making effective use. We also spoke about that last week in the webinar. And scaffold complex content. So for example, you start with a story at the start of the lesson. So this is exactly what the lecturer in the video did. She started with a story about remembering names. And then at the end of her lesson, she closed off the lesson by returning to that story and say, you know what, actually, maybe that is not what I need to learn. I've got other superpowers. And offer what they call signposting on how to approach the content so that people know where they are in the content. Allow time for reading, processing, and discussing. And also, you can also do that while you're doing an online lesson, because we often think, no, we just need to talk in the time, all the time. But let's have some time for reading, processing, and discussing. And the last one, don't be afraid of silence. Okay, are there any questions on this? Are there any other tips that maybe you can add from your own experience?
No, we haven't got anything on the chat section.
Okay, wonderful. Then if people are okay with it, we can move on to the last part.
Before you move, is that
Yes,
I've added two of the others to encourage participation as number one, and then number two, always provide feedback. And immediate feedback actually is that it actually will also be able to assist the learners to actually pay attention and focus.
Yes, yeah, definitely. That's a good one. Thank you for adding that. And you see how difficult it sometimes is to encourage participation. And it's not always because the learners or the participants might be shy, but it can also be, and I think this often happens in webinars, that sometimes the technology keeps people from contributing. That's why it's also always important to offer feedback in different ways. So you can contribute like you do by doing it verbally and unmuting yourself. But that's why we also ask people, you know, you can also contribute in the chat and post your comments in there. Okay, so we're nearing the end of this webinar. So I think quite a few people who are present today were also present in last week's webinar where we were talking about TPEC. So I want to look back to that webinar and to our lessons learned. So if we think back to the TPEC framework, where we were talking about, remember TPEC, the technological, pedagogical content knowledge, TPEC, the sweet spot here in the middle between technological knowledge, content knowledge, and pedagogical knowledge. In which of the knowledge areas do you think that strategies to deal with transactional distance and cognitive overload will be situated? In which of the areas within the TPEC framework? Does anybody want to venture a guess? Maybe one of the facilitators wants to contribute something. Toko or Koketso or Ntombi.
I'd say it's pedagogical content knowledge. Because you need to be aware of the type of pedagogy that you need to apply in the lesson. And you also need to know the type of content that you're teaching, because there are some pedagogies that do not go with certain content. So when you're well aware of your pedagogy and your content, it's easier for you to actually align this and work towards the strategies that we're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think, and does anybody else want to contribute something on this?
I think it also falls under technological knowledge, because if you know the technology that you are using, then it will be much more easier for you to even deliver the content. Because if you are using a technology and then you don't know the technology that you are using, then you won't be able to deliver the content. Hence, we now have what we call death by PowerPoint.
Yes. No, I hear what you say. So would you agree with me if we say that the pedagogical strategy would be leading, but always in overlap with either your content, the technology, or right in the middle here, a combination of both of those? But that the pedagogical strategy is actually leading, because you need to know how you're going to teach a certain topic from your subject, and you need to know what technology can support you in delivering that pedagogical strategy. So if you decide that you're going to test, for example, something about pollution and life sciences, so you decide to do a quiz. So you need to know which apps are available for you to use a quiz with your learners. So that can be Kahoot, that can be a quiz that you set up on the Oxford EduZone platform. But the pedagogy comes first, which is why I think it's always important, that we that our teachers are involved in teaching content, because they know the strategies and they can then combine it with the digital solutions that are available. Okay. And the next part is more for yourself. So I hope you recognize the teaching change frame that we spoke about. Remember, both of these, both the TPEC and the teaching change frame are elements from the professional development framework for digital learning from DBE. And in this teaching change frame, we spoke about how we're moving with transformative pedagogies from teaching to learning. So this is becoming more learner-centered, and the teacher as a facilitator from a traditional position where the teacher is the one knowledgeable person and the learners are just listening. And if we look up on the y-axis, we're looking at awareness and use of digital tools and resources. So are we digital teaching or are we moving towards digital learning? So in the previous webinar, you looked at this and could plot for yourself where you currently are as a teacher, and also plan in which direction you would want your professional development to go. So you could say, well, actually, I'm quite comfortable using digital technologies, but I want to learn a bit more about transformative pedagogical strategies. So I'm more here. Or you could say, well, I'm already happy to let my learners be more learner-centered, so I give them a lot of assignments to do for themselves, and I want to find out more about digital technologies that can support me with that. So my direction would be here. Or you could say, well, I feel more comfortable in this quadrant, and if I think about it, I would want to move, across both. I want to learn more about pedagogical strategies and about digital technologies to move this way. So for yourself, if you've plotted your current position and indicated direction of your professional development, and we've now had this webinar on transactional distance, synchronous activities, asynchronous activities, tips and tricks where we're looking at let's work together, let's have fun, and let's manage cognitive load. Does your own position and the direction of professional development, has it changed? So just consider it again for yourself. At the end of each of these webinars, we'll come back to this. And I hope for you that every week that you attend, things will become clearer for you. And if you want, obviously, you can share with us. I don't know if somebody would want to share something with us around this.
We haven't got anything, Josine.
Okay, thank you. But it is also for yourself. I think that's important. Okay, so we've come to the end. So this is where we're going to check if our training objectives were met. So after attending the webinar, I'm going to read out the training objectives that we posted at the beginning of the webinar. And I'm going to ask you to agree. So you can give us a thumbs up, you can give us a question mark, or you can disagree with a thumbs down. And you'll find those emojis in your chat when you click on emojis. Or you can just put it in writing if you want to in the chat. So agree, question mark, or disagree. So after attending this webinar, do you realize the opportunities of blended learning? Are we getting feedback in?
Sandile gives us a thumbs up.
Okay, wonderful. Do we understand the theory of transactional distance?
Another thumbs up from Sandile.
Oh,
It's a thumbs up from Sandile.
yes, wonderful. Do we know how to manage transactional distance by balancing synchronous and asynchronous activities?
Sandile agrees again.
And do we understand the concept of cognitive load?
Tyrell says yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do we have some more strategies to prevent cognitive overload?
Tyrell says yes.
Wonderful.
And we have a thumbs up from Sandile.
Good. And do we realize how Oxford EduZone supports both balancing synchronous and asynchronous activities and preventing cognitive overload?
Durrell says yes.
And I hope you saw in the chat, Sandila, that Derek from Oxford University Press has put a comment in there for you that you will be contacted by somebody from Oxford University Press to talk more about Oxford EduZone and how you can gain access to it.
Okay, no, I was not focused. I didn't see it, but it's good. I'll wait for them because they have all my details, my
Yes.
email address and telephone.
Yeah, no, definitely. So they will be in touch with you to make sure that you can access Oxford EduZone and learn more about it. Okay, so going forward, this was webinar number 2 in a series of 5. Next week, there won't be a webinar because it's Freedom Day next week on the 27th, but the week after, oh, I thought I'd taken this one out. We'll be looking at Bloom's digital taxonomy. I think everybody still remembers Bloom's taxonomy with the lower order thinking skills and the higher order thinking skills. And we'll be looking at how digital has changed Bloom's digital taxonomy, or how it maybe has made it wider, how there's more ways of testing our learners' lower order and challenging their higher order thinking skills. Then we'll have a webinar, number 4 will be on the key 21st century learning skills, or the 4 Cs, as we call them. And the last one, webinar 5, the week after that, will be about putting digital learning skills into practice. Okay, so now the last part, I hope you all have been able to find the link for the attendance register, which has been up throughout the webinar. And can I kindly ask one of the facilitators to put the link to the workshop feedback form into the chat as well. So then you only have to click on it and it opens for you, and you can then complete it in your own time and at your own pace. And like I said at the beginning, that if you complete both the workshop attendance register and the workshop feedback form, you will receive a certificate of attendance via email. And then what you'll find, like I said, if you click under handouts, you'll find a PDF with all the slides from this session. You'll find a participants manual, which has a bit more detail than the slides have. Plus, tomorrow you will receive a recording of the webinar so that you can watch it again at your own leisure. And possibly share with colleagues to make them excited about this whole digital learning skills journey so that they can also join us. And lastly, let us also put the link to our WhatsApp group in there, because you're also invited to join our WhatsApp group, where we will be reminding you of the webinars and we'll be posting in additional information as well. Okay. Let me see if I can quickly find the link to share with you. Okay, here's the link. I'm going to put that in the chat for you. So if you're not part of our WhatsApp group yet, please just click on this link and join us there, where we'll keep you updated on all relevant information, but you can also ask any questions. And I also like to ask you to share the information about this webinar with your colleagues so that they'll also be joining us next week. So if there are no further questions or comments, I would like to thank you for your time and your participation. I hope you learned something from today. I definitely did again. And then we look forward to seeing you not on the 27th of April, but the week after. But we'll also remind you of that, both via email and in our WhatsApp group. So please click on the link to join the WhatsApp group. And enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, and same to you that side.
Thank you. It was lovely meeting you, Sandila.
All right, no thanks. I'll try and bring more people next week.
Yes, that would be great. We would really enjoy that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Darrell, also, thank you very much for attending again. Good of you to come back, and I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time again as well. Bye-bye. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Darrell. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.